Hi guys, this is Ramon Goose and welcome to The Guitar Show. Paul McCartney was born on the 18th of June 1942 in Liverpool. Paul's father was a trumpet player and pianist who led a jazz band in the 1920s. His father encouraged him to play the piano and take up lessons, but Paul preferred to learn by ear. At age 11, Paul joined the choir at St Barnabas Church in Mosley Hill. For his 14th birthday, he received a nickel-plated trumpet from his father. However, due to being influenced by the rock and roll that he heard on Radio Luxembourg, Paul decided that he wanted to be able to sing while playing, so he traded his trumpet for his first guitar. This was a 6-string Zenith Model 17. It was an arch-top, non-cutaway acoustic with F-holes. The Zenith brand was distributed in the UK by Boozy and Hawkes. These guitars were made in Germany and also Czechoslovakia. The guitar was actually made by Framers, but rebranded in the UK as Zenith. At the time, the Zenith guitar retailed for 14 guineas, and he was able to trade the trumpet in for this guitar. Initially, he found it difficult to play the guitar right-handed, but after seeing a poster which advertised a Slim Whitman concert, he realised that Whitman played left-handed, and he decided to reverse the order of strings on his Zenith guitar. Paul wrote his first song, I Lost My Little Girl, on this guitar, and also composed a tune which would become When I'm 64, although later that was played on the piano. The first song that Paul played in public was the song Long Tall Sally by Little Richard. This was at a Butlins holiday camp talent competition. At the age of 15, on the 6th of July 1957, Paul met John Lennon and his band, The Quarrymen, at the St Peter's Church Hall Fete in Woolton. To quote Paul McCartney, I changed the strings around. I never could change the nut. I wasn't a tech. The 6th string always had a fat hole where the first strings would have to go. We'd chop a little bit off a match, stick that in there, and that would lift the nut enough. And then you had to hollow out a bit of the nut to get the bass string in, because that kept slipping out. So you did your own technical work, high precision. A very do-it-yourself affair, but it eventually worked and would hold all the strings, and that was the main thing. If you clouted it, it would just come off. Later, Paul mounted a little pickup near the bridge and eventually removed the pickguard. He used this guitar until the first Beatles trip to Hamburg. This guitar apparently still hangs in Paul's studio, and you can see it being pulled down for the anthology video to play a bit of 20 Flight Rock. This is a photo of a young Paul with a Framers 5-1 parlour guitar. It can be seen in some early photos, and it apparently belonged to Paul's father. It was also seen in this photo in 1962, which was a songwriting session at Forthlin Road. In January 1959, John Lennon, George Harrison and Paul McCartney billed themselves as Johnny and the Moondogs and were playing rock and roll whenever they could find a drummer. Lennon's art school friend Stuart Sutcliffe joined in January 1960 when they changed their name to the Beatles. In May 1960, they changed their name to the Silver Beatles. The Silver Beatles consisted of McCartney on drums, Lennon and Harrison on guitars, and Sutcliffe on bass. And on a brief tour of Scotland, Paul McCartney actually changed his name to Paul Ramon, which is the same name as me. Stu Sutcliffe was the band's bass player, and upon joining the Quarrymen on January the 21st, 1960, Sutcliffe barely knew how to play a bass. There were few electric basses available in Liverpool around this time, but Sutcliffe managed to find a Hoffner Model 505, which appeared in the Selmer catalogue, 328, which was the blonde model, or 333, which was the brunette model. Sutcliffe's bass was made in 1959. It was a hollow body which was 17¼ inches wide and 2½ inches deep, with a triple bound spruce top, 2 F-holes, a small Hoffner decal, and a maple back and sides. It had a rosewood fingerboard with 21 frets, and also notice here in the photo there's a 0 fret. It had a 3-ply nut, 2 on the side tuners, and horizontal Hoffner logo with a pearl flower design inlaid on the headstock. There were 2 black bar-shaped single coil pickups and a rectangular control plate with 2 volume knobs and 3 tone switches. It had an adjustable wooden bridge, a trapeze tailpiece, and a floating pickguard. Sutcliffe purchased the bass at Frank Hesse's music store on January 21st, 1960. Although Paul was one of the band's original guitar players, he would often fill in on various other instruments when it was needed. Along with playing drums and piano, McCartney would often fill in on bass when Sutcliffe did a no-show. He would take Sutcliffe's Hoffner 505 bass and play it upside down. To quote Paul, "So I used to play Stu's bass upside down. He used to let me use it a little bit if he didn't come in one night to the club. I've been playing piano on stage. Quite good for me. Gave me a lot of piano practice. Couldn't really play, but I learned to. So I was quite glad to get back into the front line. When the band returned back to Liverpool from Hamburg, Paul was the obvious choice to replace Stu on bass." After Paul's 18th birthday, he decided that it was time to buy a new guitar. On June the 30th, 1960, he purchased a Rossetti Solid 7 6-string electric guitar from Hessey's in Liverpool. This guitar featured a semi-hollow, double cutaway body without F-holes, 3 on-a-side tuners, a rosewood fingerboard with dot inlays, and a trapeze tailpiece. It was fitted with an Egmont Royal PP2 2-pickup white pickguard assembly that had 2 black tone and 2 black volume knobs. The finish of the guitar was sunburst, with a solid 7 decal on the lower body. McCartney would eventually remove the Egmont pickguard assembly and install a single Hoffner 503 pickup, and also fit the guitar with 3 piano strings so that he could play it like a bass guitar. The Solid 7 was made by the Egmont Company in the Netherlands, and it was distributed in the UK by Rossetti. It cost McCartney £21. McCartney used it throughout the spring of 1961 for numerous Beatles performances in and around Liverpool. When the Beatles made their second trip to Hamburg, McCartney decided to switch to playing piano. His Rossetti guitar was starting to fall apart, probably due to the abnormal stresses placed on the guitar because of those heavy bass strings. Sutcliffe had returned to playing bass for the group, so a bass player was no longer needed, so McCartney switched to playing piano. The Rossetti guitar had started to fall apart when this happened, as McCartney explains. "I dropped it one day," he recalled in a 1964 interview. "It was a complete write-off, but I didn't think it was worth repairing. So all of us, George, Stu, Pete and John, especially John, had a great time smashing it to bits by jumping up and down on it. A bit mad, I suppose. But we had to get rid of our pent-up energy sometimes, and it seemed the obvious thing to do at the time. I couldn't afford to buy a new guitar, so I became the official piano player. No, I didn't know how to play, I knew a few chords, and the rest of the boys decided that they needed a pianist in the group, so for a few weeks I ruined the top 10 club piano in Hamburg." Sutcliffe's announcement that he would be leaving his role as bass player of the Beatles spurred McCartney to look for a real bass guitar. It was in the Steinway shop in the centre of Hamburg that McCartney found his German-made Hoffner 501 bass, nicknamed the Violin Bass for its body shape. The price of the bass was 287 Deutschmarks. McCartney recalls, "I couldn't afford a Fender. Fenders even then seemed to be about £100. All I could really afford was about £30. I found this Hoffner violin bass, and to me it seemed like, because I was left-handed, it looked less daft because it was symmetrical. I got into that. That became my main bass." McCartney custom-ordered this bass guitar. It could well be that this was the first left-handed bass that Hoffner ever built. The first Hoffner 501 bass that McCartney owned was a hollow-bodied with a solid spruce carved top and a one-piece flat back body. It was built with a 3-piece maple neck and an unbound rosewood fingerboard with dot inlays and 22 frets. It had a shorter 30-inch scale. The headstock had a vertical Hoffner logo and it was fitted with 2 on-the-side nickel-plated rugby ball tuners. The bass was equipped with 2 Hoffner nickel-plated diamond logo pickups in forward positions. The rectangle control panel had 2 volume knobs and 3 switches for rhythm solo, bass on, and treble on. There was an adjustable wood bridge and a nickel-plated trapeze tailpiece and a floating white pearl pickguard. The first Hoffner Beatle bass that McCartney used was nicknamed the Cavern Bass. As can be heard on the early Beatles recording, the sound of the Hoffner is very round and rich. The mid-range tone is quite prominent, and due to the fact that it's got a hollow body, it can be very resonant and bass-heavy in the upper registers. McCartney tended to play the Hoffner with the treble switch off and the bass switch on. The rhythm or solo switch usually was selected to rhythm, which meant that only the neck pickup would have been activated. This setting produces a powerful bass tone. When McCartney received an updated version of his Hoffner bass in 1963,
He decided to have his original bass refinished in polyester sunburst by Sound City of London and had new pickups and pots installed. After this, it served as a backup on the 1964 tours, but in general it took a backseat to the updated new model. It then appeared again in late 1968, minus its pickguard for the Revolution video from the David Frost show, and it's last seen in footage from Twickenham Studios where the Beatles were filming Let It Be. Soon afterwards it was stolen, most likely from a closet at EMI's Abbey Road studio, along with Harrison's George Tennessean and a second Rickenbacker. McCartney played his new 501 violin bass on the UK TV show Ready Steady Go. I ordered another Hoffner bass because it was the only left-handed bass available and I thought I'd better have a spare. The main difference between McCartney's 1963 Hoffner 501 violin bass and his original Hoffner bass was the placement of the pickups and also the style of the Hoffner logo. The pickups were mounted further apart, with one placed close to the bridge and one nearer the neck. The second bass had two on a side open back strip tuners, an unbound dot inlaid rosewood fingerboard with a 0 fret, and a 3-ply white-black-white nut. The single volume and tone controls with the 3 flick action switches mounted to the rectangular pearloid plate were similar to his first Hoffner, and the archtop laminated spruce top and arched 2-piece maple back were finished in Hoffner's brown brunette sunburst finish. The bridge and tailpiece were also the same as the original bass, as was the pearloid pickguard, despite having new routes to accommodate the new pickup placements. The second Hoffner 500 bass would become McCartney's main instrument of choice. It's also the bass which people would identify him most with. From '63, he used it on almost all of the rest of the Beatles' live performances and also television appearances. It also featured on many of the Beatles recordings until the Beatles broke up. In 1966, he had removed the pickguard, and the last time it saw action with the Beatles was on the Apple rooftop sessions. McCartney had placed a bassman sticker from his speaker cabinet on the front of the bass. McCartney resurrected this bass at Elvis Costello's request for Flowers in the Dirt and for later tours. Comparing it to Charlie Chaplin's Cane, he said, "You just expect to see it." The bass today still has a set list from the 1966 tours taped onto it, and it reads Rock and Roll, She's a Woman, If I Needed, Tripper, Babies in Black, I Feel Fine, Yesterday, Wanna Be, Nowhere, Paperback, and Long Tall. McCartney would sometimes use a foam mute on his Hoffner bass, and he would also use flat wound strings. Although when a journalist once asked him what strings he used, McCartney replied, "The shiny ones." Hoffner themselves say that Paul McCartney owns a total of 5 Hoffner basses. These would include his 1963 Hoffner bass that he used in the Beatles, a backup 501, a Jubilee version, and 2 anniversary Cavern Basses. In 1964, McCartney acquired a new guitar, an acoustic flat-top Epiphone Texan FT79N. He acquired his new guitar at Manny's in New York City. Paul used this guitar for writing and for working in the studio. Also, he used it for the live performances of the song Yesterday. The Epiphone Texan was in fact right-handed, however he played it upside down and strung it for a left-handed player. The Epiphone Texan was similar to Gibson's J45 acoustic, and in fact both models were made at Gibson's Kalamazoo factory. The guitar's serial number was 194959. The Texan guitar retailed in the USA in 1964 for the value of $175. In December 1964, whilst rehearsing for a Christmas Beatles show at the London Hammersmith Odeon, McCartney bought an Epiphone Casino guitar in a similar fashion to his Texan guitar. He also restrung this right-handed guitar for a left-handed player. McCartney's Casino was built with a 16-inch laminate maple and birch body, finished in sunburst with white binding on the front and back. The guitar had a one-piece mahogany neck with a bound rosewood fingerboard. McCartney's ES-230TD had an early-style Gibson design headstock rather than Epiphone's later hourglass-shaped headstock. The guitar featured 2 P90 pickups with nickel-plated dog ear covers. It came with a nickel ABR bridge and nylon bridge saddles. Also, it featured a licensed Bigsby vibrato. The serial number was 84075, and it was shipped on November 1st, 1962. McCartney bought the Casino on the advice of blues musician John Mayall. McCartney used the casino extensively in the studio with the Beatles and throughout his solo career. In 1997, he stated in an interview, "If I had to choose one electric guitar, it would be that guy." He bought the guitar for 164 guineas. In August 1965, whilst the Beatles were relaxing from their US tour, and also just having met their hero Elvis Presley, McCartney was visited by Rickenbacker's Francis Hall and his son John. They presented him with a Rickenbacker 4001S bass. He'd actually seen this bass a year earlier in New York when also being visited by Rickenbacker. But unfortunately it was a right-handed bass, and McCartney passed up on the opportunity to own it. McCartney recalls receiving this new bass. "I just remember Rickenbacker giving it to me, and they invited us down to the factory, which I never made. I never got down there. It was a little bit out of LA, I think, but I liked the instrument a lot." This was one of the first left-handed basses that the company had produced. It was a through-neck solid body electric bass. It had a single neck position toaster pickup, plus a Rickenbacker horseshoe pickup in the bridge position. It came wired in mono with 2 volume and tone controls and a 3-way toggle switch. It also featured Rickenbacker's combination bridge and tailpiece and 2 aside Grover tuning pegs. The neck was made of maple and the fingerboard, which had dot inlays, was made of rosewood. The bass was finished in Rickenbacker's Fire Glow colour. Its serial number is DA23, indicating a date of manufacture of January 1964. At the time in the UK, this bass would have cost 175 guineas. Harrison recalls its first use on Think For Yourself on 8th of November 1965. It served as a backup for live dates in late 65 and for the 66 tours. But in terms of recording, by the time the band made Paperback Writer and Rain in the summer of 66, the Rickenbacker had become McCartney's bass of choice. He used it on literally all of Revolver, and late that year for Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever, and also for the rest of the Sgt. Pepper's sessions. For the release of that album, McCartney gave the bass a psychedelic paint job, just as Harrison and Lennon had done to their guitars. He used it that way on record and the videos until late 1968. Although McCartney resurrected his Hoffners for Let It Be, he returned to the rig afterwards, but now it was sanded back to the original natural finish. He has used his bass extensively within his solo career, and in 1975 he shipped it back to Rickenbacker to get the pickup replaced and a full setup on the whole guitar. On the 28th of March 1967, pictures were taken of McCartney working on guitar solos for Good Morning and Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. As well as using his Epiphone Casino for these solos, he also was pictured with a Fender Esquire guitar. This is, of course, a single pickup version of the Telecaster. As per usual, Paul McCartney had restrung this guitar to be played by a left-hander. Whether or not Paul McCartney still has this guitar is unknown. In 1968, McCartney acquired a Martin D28 acoustic guitar. The guitar was used on the White Album sessions, and it's also the one that featured on the song Blackbird. Its serial number 223757 identifies it as a 1967 model. In this photo here, John and Paul can be seen in Rishikesh in India, working on a song intended for the forthcoming White Album. And you can clearly see Paul playing his Martin D28 acoustic. Whilst in the recording studio for the White Album sessions, McCartney can be seen here playing a new left-handed Fender jazz bass, whilst for acoustic work he was using his Martin D28 flat top. McCartney's left-handed jazz bass had a 3-colour sunburst finish, tortoiseshell pickguard, with a bound rosewood fingerboard and block inlays. It was fitted with 2 standard jazz bass pickups and wired with a 3-knob control layout, all mounted with the output jack on the chrome plate. Although a lot of bass players tended to remove the chromed pickup and bridge covers from the Fender basses, McCartney played his jazz bass with both covers left in place. McCartney used his jazz bass on 5 tracks, including Your Blues, Glass Onion, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Sun King, and Mean Mr. Mustard. It's more than likely that McCartney still owns this bass. For Wings, most likely Paul McCartney used his Rickenbacker for all the recordings and most of the live work. But here you can see an interesting bass that he picked up during his time with Wings. This is a K Jazz Special, and it is seen featured in the Junior Farms video from the early 70s. It can also be seen in the video for the song Ebony and Ivory, as well as being on the cover of the single Jet. He did use this bass on occasions for the Band on the Run tour with the Wings. It features a 3D raised chevron logo on the crown and is designed in the classic Art Deco style of the 1950s. The headstock is extra large. The Jazz Special bass had a very limited production of less than 500 made worldwide and came in two different finishes. It has a blade design K pickup and the pickguard is white with gold stranded fleck. It features separate volume and tone controls, trapeze tailpiece and a rosewood bridge. Here is Paul McCartney in their video for Helen Wills by The Wings in 1973. You can see here he's playing an Ampeg Dan Armstrong Plexi in this video. He actually owned the only left-hand instrument ever produced of this model. This next instrument is a 1970s Zamatis Heart-Hole bass. Tony Zamatis handmade his electric guitars for many years, mostly for UK musicians such as Ronnie Lane and Greg Lake and Paul McCartney. You can see McCartney playing this bass on the Wings video again and again and again, released in 1979. This next instrument is a BB 1200S by Yamaha. McCartney acquired this bass in 1978. This was a left-handed model that was given to him by Yamaha. It featured a unique split pickup. For the D and G strings, the pickup is close to the neck, and for the E and A strings, the pickup is close to the bridge. It had a through neck design and at the time was the top of the line model. McCartney used the Yamaha bass on the seventh and final studio album by The Wings, called Back to the Egg, released in 1979. He also used it live when he did the concerts for Kampuchea, as well as on the video Good Night Tonight. Okay, let's talk about McCartney's 5-string wow bass. Let's hear from McCartney himself. He says, "We had these jams in Dockland in London that turned into the Russian album, and Trevor Horn showed up one time. I knew him as a producer, but he told me he used to be a bass player in a ballroom-type show band before he was in Buggles. So he showed up and he had a wow 5-string bass. I said, oh, that's cool. Low B, great. So I got one based on his recommendation, and I really liked it. My favourite thing I've done recently on it was the new Beatles record we've made, Free Like a Bird, which is really cool." McCartney stated himself that his wife Linda bought him this bass for his birthday. McCartney talks about using the wow to record the song Free as a Bird. "I played the wow, and what I like was I played very, very normal bass, really out of the way because I didn't want to feature. There are one or two moments where I break a little bit loose, but mostly I tried to anchor the track. There's one lovely moment when it modulates to C, so I was able to use the low C of the 5-string, and that's it, the only time I used the low one, which I like. Rather than just bassing out and being low, 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 I play normal bass, and then there's this low C and the song takes off. It actually takes off anyway because a lot of harmonies come in and stuff, but it's a real cool moment that I'm proud of. That's my wow moment." Paul has also stated that his wow bass was quite heavy. McCartney used this bass in the studio as well on his album Flowers in the Dirt, which was released in June 1989. The album Flowers in the Dirt featured several songs he co-wrote with Elvis Costello. It was Elvis Costello that actually got McCartney to stop using the wow bass and return to his original Beatles bass, which was the Hoffner Bass. Costello recounts that when he first began collaborating with Paul McCartney, the former Beatle favoured a super high-tech custom bass that his wife Linda had given him for Christmas. It had, much to Costello's horror, 5 strings. Costello inquired about the Hoffner, trying not to sound too much like the Beatle gig that all of us would be in that moment. McCartney then pulled it out of storage and has been using it as his main instrument ever since. This 1957 Gibson Les Paul Gold Top was a gift to him from his wife Linda. She bought it at California Guitar in Santa Barbara around 1980. You can see him playing it on the video for Once Upon a Long Ago from 1987. And this was a guitar that he often toured with. In this photo you can see McCartney with his 1960 Gibson Les Paul standard guitar. Originally it was owned by a schoolteacher in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He then sold it to a guitar dealer who then offered it to Paul McCartney. McCartney told him he was not interested in this left-handed Bass since he already had a gold top that Linda had given to him for his birthday. The guitar was then offered to Rick Nielsen of Cheap Trick. Rick Nielsen then decided to sell it to Gruhn's Guitars on consignment. It was through Gruhn's in which the 1960 left-handed Bass was sold by Rick Nielsen to Paul McCartney. Apparently it was sold for $9,000. There have only been 4 left-handed Gibson Les Pauls made between 1958 and 1960. This next guitar is McCartney's Crowd Goes Wild Les Paul, produced for use during the International Day of Happiness concerts and featured prominently on the album Memory Almost Full. It has remained a popular fixture in McCartney's lineup of guitars, featuring a cartoon crowd of all nations and religions joining together in celebration. Here you can see McCartney using this guitar live in 2016. The artwork was hand-painted by Rosie Brooks. In this photo, you can see an upright bass which was originally owned by Elvis Presley's bass player Bill Black. It was bought by Paul's wife Linda in the late 1970s, and it can be seen in the video clip to McCartney's song Baby's Request. In 1995, he played it on Real Love, the last new Beatles record. Black had sold his bass around 1962 to Mike Leach of the Memphis Boys, and it remained in Leach's attic until sometime in the late 1970s. Okay guys, thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. This is Ramon Goose signing out.